Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all here on this sadly rather wet evening, but thanks for braving the weather. My name's David Byrne. I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the Faculty of Medical Sciences. But by background, I'm a clinical neurologist and used to see a lot of people with Parkinson's and dementia. And of course, both of those are diseases of aging and get more common as one gets older. I used to, in a former life also, look after the Institute for Aging and Health when we had one. And I know there are colleagues in the audience who are very familiar with that institute, and it's lovely to see you here this evening. The reason I've given you that particular additional background about myself, as will become clear, is that I am going to join the panel. So at least you will realize that, at least in some small way, I feel qualified to be able to contribute, I hope, to the debate. Now, the debate itself, as you can see from the holding slide, is the McArdle Debate Series, Perspectives on Aging, and indeed derives its name from Helen McArdle. Now, it's terribly unfortunate that we only heard today that Helen herself is indisposed, but was very keen, for obvious reasons, that this event proceeded in her absence. But we're delighted to welcome members of her family, and we hope that you'll enjoy this evening and that you will be able to give back good, favourable reports to her. That we look forward to that. And certainly on behalf of the university, we'd like to wish Helen a full and speedy recovery. And again, we'd be really grateful if that could be passed on. Why is Helen's name attached to this debate series? Well, I actually, to be perfectly honest, heard it myself from a visit that Mark, her son, made really quite recently, where we had a bit of an open agenda, and Mark actually sat and for the first time actually gave a bit of a chronology really in terms of Helen's contribution to the aging world. And it was just completely jaw-dropping and inspirational, I have to say. She has devoted a huge amount of her time and her life to giving inspiration and long-standing commitment to help older people live healthier and happier lives. And that's been manifest not only in her professional life and, in a sense, her groundbreaking entrepreneurial spirit as well, but also been manifest in other ways. For example, a very generous multi-million-pound donation to Newcastle University to support pioneering research to look at the priorities of an aging society. Again, as several of you in the audience know, many of you in the audience know, aging remains at the forefront of Newcastle's priorities as a university. It's one of the things we pride ourselves on, both in the breadth of our aging research and the depth of our aging research. And I think it's fair to say, and you know, that I know there are those here who have perhaps in time been a little concerned as to the future of how aging research might be shaping up in Newcastle, but I can absolutely reassure you, particularly given some of the infrastructure awards that we've landed in the past year in particular, that we are not taking our foot off the accelerator and that we remain internationally at the forefront of this space. And if you sort of take what we've got in the kitty, so to speak, and the excellent people that we've got across the whole of the university working in this space, we feel that we're ready now to kick on to the next level. And the next level is a really exciting project, which we're calling the Healthy Innovation Neighbourhood. But to those of you in the audience, which that term will mean very much to, you might know it as the Campus for Aging and Vitality, and some of you may know it as the old General Hospital site, and some of the older person may know it as the old Wingrove. But it is now. You don't have to show what name means what to you. But obviously, it's a huge site, around 29 acres. The university has bought this, and I think that it is just a huge opportunity for us to harness the power of that site, set in the location that it is, to work with the community, to try and leverage all sorts of assets that we hold in research with multiple partners, including the council, other universities, and industry, to really try and make a significant societal impact to an aging society. And I should say at this point that this in large part derives to the vision of our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Chris Day. And I'm delighted that Chris has managed to brave the elements without a brolly to come here tonight. And it's also really important that you understand, and I think most of you here do know, that Chris is a slightly rare beast because he is a medic as a VC. There are not many in the country. And his recent award of CBE was actually not for his services to higher education, although that would have been meritorious, but it was actually in the field of liver disease. And again, that is an area that Newcastle excels in. And if you've been reading the newspapers at the weekend, you will see we are facing an epidemic of liver disease, particularly in an aging society, as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which was Chris's particular forte, translates through into fibrotic disease, which in turn can translate forward into liver cancer. And Newcastle has real excellence in this space as well. So that is something that, you know, as I say, as a campus, as a neighbourhood, we're really passionate about, and we've just devoted a fair chunk of our exec board away day today to that very topic and scoping it out. And I can assure you that it's a really exciting vision and one that you're going to see a lot more of, I hope, in the coming years. So at this point, I would just like to introduce our panel, and the panel are the two ladies in the middle plus myself. So I'm going to start with Barbara, who's nearest to me. And Barbara, would you maybe just like to introduce yourself and give a little bit of your background to the audience?
So yes, Barbara Douglas, and I'm the Executive Officer for the Elders Council of Newcastle, which is an older people-led organisation. It's an older people's forum, and it provides a platform for older people to have a voice about the things that matter to them. I actually started working on ageing in Newcastle 28 years ago, before the Elders Council was formed, working with the team from the King's Fund, who were taking a whole systems approach to ageing and quality of life of older people. And at that time, they insisted on older people being part of the conversations with the great and the good of the city. And that start, if you like, for me was how we started to continue the journey of involving older people as much as we can in decision making in the city, and also in working in partnerships, multi-sector partnerships, to tackle some of the challenges and the opportunities that we face with an aging society. So that's my background, and my passion still is for older people to have a strong voice in what happens.
Thank you, Barbara. And now pass you over to Lynne.
Hi, everyone. My name is Professor Lynne Corner. I am the Deputy Director of the UK's National Innovation Centre for Ageing, which is based here in this wonderful building, the Catalyst in Newcastle. And I'm also the Director of Voice, which is an international network of citizens who are interested in getting involved in everything to do with research and innovation on healthy ageing. Co-founder Jim Edwardson in the audience today as well. Like Barbara, I've been at Newcastle University for some time, originally a gerontologist researcher with a particular interest in dementia, but also how to involve people meaningfully in research, and so that we can really understand what are people's priorities, what matters to them, what do they care about, and so we can effectively translate that wonderful research into world-class services which are going to help ultimately people to live healthier, better lives, as David said in his introduction.
Thanks ever so much, Lynne. Now, the observant amongst you will realise that I haven't introduced one colleague that's nearest to me, and I will come to Anya in just a second. But I will just say at this point that those of you who read the brief will think, hang on, we're being shortchanged here. Where's Rose Gilroy? Because those of you who know Professor Rose Gilroy will know that she's been heavily involved in looking at the design of homes suitable for an aging society. And the sad thing is that Rose is actually one of the few people I've known who's been plastered after a fall. But in fact, Rose, just think about it. That's right. So she sadly fell at the weekend in a non-inebriated state and actually fractured a leg. So she is now in a full leg plaster and unable to wait there. So we're really sorry that Rose can't be with us, because I know she's very lively. It will make Anya's job a lot easier in terms of sharing, but I think that Rose has got some wonderful views, and it's sorry that she's not with us. And again, we pass on our very best wishes to her for a full and speedy recovery. So as I said, the bad news is that I will be joining the panel with my hat on, hopefully as somebody with a background in aging in multiple areas, as I explained at the start. But the good news is you are being chaired by the very capable hands of Professor Anya Hurlbert. And I've known Anya for many years. She's a wonderful neuroscientist, a wonderful colleague, but she's also our Dean of Advancement for the university and has held that role for a number of years. And I have to say a massive personal thanks to Anya, because in fact, she's offered to step into this chairing role at kind of the 11th hour. So I'm going to pass the baton now to you, Anya, and let you carry on with the debate. Thank you very much.
But I am just going to carry on from here because you've done a fantastic welcome speech, and there's nothing really I can add to it except that although we miss Professor Gilroy very much, and we might come back to talking about falls later since they're so important in the aging population. But although we miss her very much, we're just thrilled to have you on the panel and to be able to hear more of your insights. What we have tonight, which I believe is meant to come up on the screen at some point, are a series of questions which the panelists have been thinking about, not just before today's panel in preparation for it, but really throughout most of their careers. So I know that you all have a lot of wisdom to contribute on these topics, but I can see also that there are many people in the audience who also have a great deal of experience, expertise, and wise advice, probably comments and maybe some questions as well. So we might run this as a bit of a panel discussion with interactivity from all of you. So please don't feel shy about raising your hands or raising points, but I'll just kick off by posing the first question. What is aging? And I thought I might turn to Barbara first, since she's Chief Executive of the Elders Council. And I thought, therefore, she might be able to be best placed to give us a definition, not just of aging, but of elders. And yes, so I'll hand over to you, Barbara.
Well, in thinking about the question, I thought, well, aging is living, really. And it's about transitions in life. And when we're young, we might really look forward to some of those transitions. We might really look forward to our 5th birthday, for example. And when we turn 70, we might think, well, how did we get here this quickly? And, where's all the time gone? But I think one of the things about aging is that when we're younger, we tend to plan for some of those transitions. So, you might be helped prepare to go to school or to college or for your first job. But actually, we're not very good at preparing for the transition into later life. And with some of the kind of complexities and the challenges that it brings. So I think there's something about us needing to prepare better for aging. And I'm sorry Rose isn't here, because Rose, together with another colleague called Moira Riseborough, we thought about this a lot at one point, and we thought, how do we get people to have conversations about their own aging and what it means for them and what their futures might be? So we devised this game, if you like, called, okay, so we know you'll never be old, but just in case, can we talk about it? And we got people sitting around tables and had playing cards saying, do you want to leave it to chance, or do you want to have a think about it? And pose different questions that people could start to think about. So they could start to think about their own transitions into later life and how they could make the most of them, really. So so that's my kind of take on what aging is. And as for when you're an elder or when you become old, I mean, we always say chronological age is absolutely no guidance on that at all. A lot of it depends on your own attitude to aging. It also depends a lot on your health, the state of your health, and what that enables you to do or not do in your later life.
Can I just one little comment, because I'd like to hear also what you have to say about this. Do we have to think of aging as something negative? We talk about growing and developing as very positive things, but does aging have to have that somewhat negative connotation anyway? David?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. I was just going to follow up with what Barbara said there, actually, because I'd kind of you know, and I think I was going to be on the receiving end tonight. I was sort of thinking, yes, the sort of biological versus chronological aspect of aging. And, you know, people spend their lives looking at cells and working out what the markers are of what's an aging cell. And then, you know, ultimately, you know, is it the years on the clock, or how you actually are? Is it a mental thing about, oh, I feel young, you know, and other people who clearly are many years chronologically younger, but, you know, will say, oh, I feel old. And societally, I remember vividly going to Malaysia, and there, if you're 50, particularly for some bizarre reason, if you're female, you are regarded as old, and the family circle around you, and you are being, you know, looked after as an older person, which I find quite bizarre. So there's clearly, there are sort of environmental / societal connotations on what's regarded as aging. The other point that I have to mention with my faculty hat on here is that the funders, and there are many in this audience who will know this, have really grappled with the concept of what aging is as well, because on the one hand, we all conjure up, well, not we, because we like to think we're a little more enlightened, but, you know, maybe if we did the sort of Marks and Spencer test, a lot of people think of an older person with multiple long-term conditions, maybe living independently, maybe somewhere else, and that's where the interventions are needed. That's where the trials are needed. So you're sort of typical false stereotypic older person. On the other hand, people also say, what's aging across the life course? You could argue that from the time that you're born, in fact, even before that, you are aging, and aging is a life course thing, and therefore to try and make a difference, you have to intervene as early as possible. And the funders have really grappled with that. And I think in turn, industry grapples with that in terms of knowing what tractable areas are, what's the economy, if you like, that constitutes the aging economy.
I would absolutely agree with that. And I think we started talking about aging in terms of healthy longevity, because it is a life course approach. And in terms of how you might invest very much earlier in life to start preventing a lot of the age-related conditions that we are so expert in kind of understanding. I mean, currently in the UK, we spend 40% of GDP treating illnesses which are essentially preventable. And so we've got to flip the script on that. We've got to change that narrative. Equally, you know, there is so much that we know we can do now in midlife in order to help people to live healthier, happier, later lives, much, you know, longer. Also, as well, we know that many older people are reaching later life in better shape than ever before. So actually, this is a real opportunity for us. And in terms of industry, as David said, industry are just starting to wake up to this enormous opportunity. 70% of the spending power locked in the over 60s in the UK, but this is a global issue. 600 million people over 60 in Asia. So, you know, this is an incredible opportunity for UK businesses, which we at the university and the UK National Innovation Centre for Ageing are here to help them both grasp that opportunity, but also that international opportunity in terms of every single country is experiencing this demographic change in ageing. But what an opportunity that is for, you know, really sensible investment, and for the UK as a real powerhouse of science and innovation to really be sort of driving that kind of agenda in terms of the world-class research that we have, how that can be translated, yes, into healthcare, but pretty well every sector this affects. So an amazing opportunity for us to really understand how that early investment can accrue benefit into later life.
Yeah, absolutely. Did I see a hand? No, I did, yes. Would you like to make a contribution to the question of what aging is?
Yes, it's the first time I've really thought about this subject. I don't have any academic experience in the subject, but I think I have quite a bit of practical experience in it. And I've come here tonight, and I hate to cast gloom on it, but I'm 80 years of age, and I'm really enjoying life, and I have done, and I'm lucky enough, I think, to be healthy. I've only got a tremor, a benign tremor, nothing else. And as I say, I emphasize I'm enjoying my life. If I have one anxiety, it's how it's going to end. I mean that in two ways. One, I think when I'm no longer capable to look after myself, the idea of going into care is horrifying. Okay? Particularly the way I understand it in this country. And the idea of not being able to look after myself is horrifying. So I feel very strongly that I would like to know, to decide when I end my life and how I end it. I'm not being dramatic, I'm not wanting to be gloomy, but equally well, I don't want to go into a situation where I'm lying there like a vegetable while the money that my children, my grandchildren can have is draining away unnecessarily. So I don't know if you ever give thought to that. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. I often think that the perfect end for me would be to go and see an anaesthetist, because having experienced it a few times, it's a fantastic way to go. I don't know if you've any thoughts on that. As I say, I don't want to be gloomy about it, but I'm sitting here with that at the age of 80 and thinking,
I've heard
I
that.
don't want to leave. You know, I'm still got a few years to go, but I'm one of these people who doesn't like to leave the future to take care of itself.
Well, clearly your quality of your quality of life must be still very high. And I think what is the worst thing about the negative aspects of aging, and I do believe there are many positive aspects, is that quality of life might decline. And when one talks about healthier, happier lives, the point is to push the quality of life forward for more years rather than to have it drop off before life itself drops off. And I think that's what you're talking about. I think Lynne had a comment.
I just think that, you know, it's a really important topic, and it's something that we need to be discussing as a society, both at an individual level, at a family level, but also at a societal level. But inherent in what you're saying there is in terms of, you know, where we are with care. And this is something that I know Helen and family care passionately about. And, you know, we're exemplars in terms of the quality of care. And as a society, we need to invest much more in quality care and actually take away a lot of the uncertainty and the fear that many older people experience in terms of later life, especially perhaps for conditions like dementia, which again, you know, there has been huge advances in terms of whatever your politics, the PM, David Cameron, had a challenge on dementia, which really put the spotlight on how important it was to invest in dementia. But equally, we need to kind of nuance this debate a little more, because sometimes when you have a debate on care, a lot of that narrative starts to switch to informal care and to family carers. At the same time, other parts of government are having a debate on women, especially reskilling, working longer is a big policy agenda. And quite frankly, the two are just not being connected. So we're putting a huge amount of strain on people in midlife, which is completely contrary to what we're trying to do, is to help everybody enjoy this healthier, happier, longer life. So actually, when we're discussing care and we're discussing kind of, you know, the complexity of care, it's really important that we join up those policy debates and that research evidence debate to say, hang on a minute, you know, we need to be investing in care. Care in parts of the UK and globally is woeful. We have a lot of work to do to raise standards, to raise the quality of care that we provide. But we've also got to make sure that we're investing in innovation, in evidence-based services and care, to make sure that we're supporting people through life with that. The one thing I am, though, and I would say that being part of the UK's National Innovation Centre for Ageing, is I'm genuinely optimistic about some of the innovations that are coming through. And I'm genuinely optimistic that we are starting to actually not just cover the more familiar aspects of ageing, but actually embrace some of the more difficult questions in terms of where we need to invest and what we need to reassure people in order to have a kind of a much more happier later life. And part of that is the question that you raised in terms of choices that people have towards the end of life.
What do you do about somebody like me who doesn't want to be cared for? No, not, you know, doesn't want to be a burden, whatever.
Yeah.
And just likes to say, right, I think I've had enough now, not being dramatic. I can't get to the toilet on my own, for example, to be practical about it.
Yeah.
I would like to terminate, but the law won't allow me to do that. And I really object to that. That's
something that's part of a policy debate and part of an ongoing dialogue with kind of, you know, different organizations, different societies, and all countries are having this debate. But what I would say is that while we're having that debate, we're also looking at how we can invest to make sure that some of the reasons that people feel that are actually, you know, minimized and reduced. And I think the issue is this is about choice, and what we mustn't do is kind of label everybody as the same experience. As you get older, you get more different. Everybody's experience is their own individual experience. And for although that's your opinion, that's absolutely valid. I completely hear what you're saying. Equally, there are people who are saying, I want to understand how I can live best with dementia. I want to understand how I can actually live my best life, even though I might have a number of different clinical conditions. So this is about choice. This is about empowerment. And perhaps most of all, it's about investing in kind of the research base in terms of how we can help prevent and manage those clinical conditions that a lot of us might experience, but also in our communities, in our neighborhoods, to make sure that if you are frailer, if you are experiencing some of the downsides of healthy aging, you are in a supportive environment in order to help you possibly live the best life you can.
Barbara, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I think particularly on your last point, Lynne, because I think we do need to think a lot about the sort of social conditions in which we're living. And one of the things that I think we need to think very strongly about is housing. And I know if Rose were here, she would speak much more articulately than I am around that. But I think what enables us to continue living well, or one of the things that enables us to continue living well when we do experience various health conditions, is if we're living in a home that can flex around us. Yeah. And actually most of the quality of our housing simply does not do that. And we're continuing to build housing which won't do that for us in the future. And work that Rose has done leading on the group trying to develop future homes has been about actually trying to look at how can we develop much more flexible housing that we can live in across the life course, quality housing that will support us in later life. And that will benefit not just us as we age, but everyone across the generations. And so I think, you mentioned earlier the health innovation neighborhood. I mean, I think that's a fantastic opportunity for Newcastle University to think about how it can create some really innovative housing on that site. Yes. Different models of housing as well. We talk about needing more supportive neighborhoods. Well, what can we learn from the co-housing models? Are you
reading the script for the site here?
Yeah, I think you can fill in quite a lot.
Yes, I am. I hope I am.
No, you are. You absolutely are.
It's a fantastic opportunity to really take some of that thinking, because I don't know, at the end of the day, who aspires to moving into sheltered housing or even retirement housing? It's not necessarily an aspirational choice, but we could make those choices aspirational, and we could make our later lives much better and enable us to live, even if we are living with multiple conditions in a different way that makes us perhaps less fearful. And I totally understand the fear and the anxiety and the need to stay in control. And I think some of these things can really help with that.
I think for me it's not so much fear as frustration, but
yeah.
We have various people who want to come in, but perhaps since we've just touched on the health innovation neighborhood, which I think presents both opportunities and challenges.
We're off script here, it doesn't matter.
But it doesn't matter, but I'm trying to slightly pull us back, but I want to give David just a chance to say a little bit more about that, because you previewed that for us. And then there are two people from the audience who'd like to say something.
Okay, thanks, Anya. Well, I mean, for sure. And I mean, Chris may want to come in as well here, obviously, as VC. But I mean, the bottom line is that it is a huge site, and there is no way that the university wants to be putting a load of shiny university buildings on the campus. That's for sure. And it's exactly as you said, Barbara, that the idea is, the vision is that we would have obviously selected themed research presence there, but that it would effectively constitute, if you like, a living laboratory, a living test bed, where there will be homes there, future homes, quite hopefully, where one will be able, with the permission of the appropriate permissions, to have the sort of thing you might imagine a bit futuristic, like instrumentation, to allow data to be recorded, to allow researchers to look at one's movements, one's activity within the space to try and pick up, for example, using novel pathways, how somebody might be at risk of falling if they have mental health issues because they're moving around less, and so on and so forth, and to work with companies to be able to bring in stereotypes, test them, and then upscale as necessary. And I think that the whole purpose of this really is to work with the community to try and, if you like, future-proof. I completely agree with what you say, and I'll use that line in future about who aspires to be in shelter accommodation. You know, I absolutely understand where you're coming from. I have no idea who's going to be looking after me in a later stage. You know, I have absolutely no idea, and I totally respect your personal views on that. But you know, if we can make it better by personalizing the experience, by trying to bring in technologies and interventions, we can surely, as Anya said, push that envelope back a bit further. So the campus is, the Health Innovation Neighbourhood is absolutely about trying to do that in a groundbreaking way. So that in a nutshell is what we're hoping to achieve. And I'll give you a cast iron example as well, is the build that is being, the first build that we're trying to get onto the site, which is going for a major grant from a government funder, and we're through the expression of interest stage, the sort of first hurdle. We've got to get the full bid in by the end of next month, and it is basically a hub for digitally enabled care everywhere. Now, what on earth does that mean? Well, what it means is actually using technology to be able to reach out in novel ways to be able to help people who at times may be very hard to connect with. So not necessarily bounded by the confines of the site, but potentially a lot further afield. So for example, you hear about coastal communities, rural communities being very isolated. And the idea is to use modern means to be able to connect with those communities to be able to deliver good for the benefit of a far wider population.
I think that's really important as well, because I love the way it's got neighborhood in the title, because I think that's what it needs to be. And actually so much of what we need to improve is how we can actually improve people's experience of their local community. And again, if we can kind of power through the work that we do in the university and our wider partners, this to be a real kind of living test bed, if you like, to be able to test in real time the products and services, we can effectively accelerate them, because we have so much knowledge about what works, but actually being able to do more to give greater scale, which I think is going to be really, really important. And that those communities at the board and the site are just so important.
Especially since communities and social connectedness has been shown to be one thing that really keeps the brain in good health. Yes, would you like to contribute something?
To say first how wonderful this sounds and how great that kind of research opportunities are there. And it's also wonderful to see Newcastle University doing something around it. But I want to come back to our 80-year-old friend here who posed the question, and I challenged the panel that you didn't answer it. You waffled around about how important it is to get care right and what the opportunities are and so on, and mentioned choice. But he doesn't have the choice that he wants. And so I ask you, should he have the law be changed?
Oh, well, that's.
Well, I could, this afternoon, the Elders Council was running a session, one of these thinking ahead sessions called Everything in Place. And that is exactly the topic that we discussed. And we heard about, you know, how the law applies in other places. And, you know, yes, people want choice. I would say of the group, there were about 10 of us in the room. We were ambivalent at the end of that discussion about what should happen, whether, you know, the law on assisted dying should be introduced in this country. At first there was a lot of enthusiasm for the idea to say, well, yes, well, why shouldn't people have choice? That makes absolute sense, and examples of people who wanted to exercise that right. But by the end, there was actually quite a lot of ambivalence in the room. So I'm not answering your question either, but all I am saying is it's good to have those conversations. It's good to start having the debate and deciding where the choice lies. Yeah.
I think, David, you wanted to.
If you don't mind, I mean, I was really hoping that we might. No, I'm getting slight sweaty palms because this is taking me back to Edinburgh a few years ago when I was just sworn in, if you like, as the president of the Association of British Neurologists, and the first thing I walked into was a debate on assisted dying, which had been a really hot topic in the ABN. You can imagine, because we're looking after people not only with, to some degree, with advanced dementia, although that's probably in this country less so in the purview of neurologists, but certainly motor neuron disease, which is, you can't fail to see, has raised its profile quite considerably in the media of late. And the view that ended up, and this is something I saw again at the weekend, I think, was it the Royal College of Surgeons, and I think have basically neutralized to take a no view position. So in other words, you're not opposed to it, you're not supporting it, but no view. So my point is, and I will just say that I had a Christmas absolutely ruined by a very zealous colleague who really felt we'd made a terrible mistake in expressing a no view on this. And he felt passionately, he came from a very theological background, shall we say. And it was difficult to the point where I literally ended up just having to pick up the phone and speak to the fellow, because it was not a medium for an email exchange. And I'll not forget that, because it was, anyway. So it was very difficult. And I think that the point is that I do respect individuals' choice. I absolutely do. And, you know, maybe in that, who knows what position any of us might be in at some point. But what we always have to recognize is that ultimately there may be a medical professional having to be involved in the administration of the coup de grace, putting it bluntly. And you have to see it from that perspective as well. And I'll be doing congregation very shortly for all the newly graduating doctors, and they'll all take the Hippocratic Oath, or the modern variant thereof. And you've got to square that somehow as well. Now, I'm just agreeing in many ways with Barbara, in fact, totally with Barbara, that the very fact that we've completely hijacked the agenda to go on to talking about this really important issue is actually very refreshing and welcome, because it is a very difficult area, and it's a very polarizing area. There are very strongly held views on both sides. And I can absolutely tell you that from the neurological fraternity. So it is difficult, but the fact we're debating it, and, you know, in a way, this is a debate, so it's great. I think it's got to be a good thing. And I think we can absolutely see that in the coming years, the situation will change. It is changing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that has generated a lot of quite rightly too. I think it is a deep question, and it's a question of life or death. Let's face it. And we're here talking about our own lives, which are and our own deaths, I suppose. So I'll turn to you, gentlemen, because you've had your hand up for a while, and I know you want to say something.
I feel very strongly on this subject. I've been through my MP, it's been voted out in Parliament, and I think that all the people who are against it are far too young. When you reach my age, and my life expectancy is about 6 or 8 years, it does prey heavily on you. I've got a sister-in-law who's blind and in care. She was the head nurse at the Freeman Hospital in the cardiac department. She was totally against the idea, but now she's 96, blind, semi-incontinent. She's changed her mind. And the decisions should be made by the people of that age. And I think it's a fundamental human right. And I think it's totally wrong that people younger people can oppose this idea. They haven't got it facing them.
May I just say, because we have not just digressed, I mean, we've veered off into the thing that we're all deeply, deeply concerned about. But what I'm hearing is that if quality of life could be magnificent for as long as we lived, and then it was suddenly cut short, we possibly wouldn't be talking about needing to have the choice to end our own lives. Now, I might be reading that wrong, but we can talk about this a little bit more, and then I think we might because we don't have that much time in this hour as well as in our lives, then turn to a more positive question, which is how can we live more healthy lives so we don't reach this point? Because there's so many hands though, and I do want people to be able to say what they want to say. I can't tell who was first, but you're the brightest. That's a lovely chartreuse color. So please go ahead.
That is the subject that we were just discussing. Thank you. It seems to me it's a pro-choice or a pro-life debate, very reminiscent of Roe versus Wade, and the severe debates the whole world went through regarding abortions. And I think we just have to have a similar debate and include, which I think is really important, the whole population, not just panels or young people or old people. We need to have a much broader discussion. But I actually raised my hand because of something completely different. And that is that it seems to me that just spontaneously discussions on aging always tend to focus on care and health and so on, which is undoubtedly important and needs to be addressed. But my question is, what do we think about including old people into society so that they are successful and useful contributors to society? That is something that we just seem to neglect and, you know, suggest go and play bingo or do your garden or something like that. And I think it is a really serious issue and something that we are now faced with, especially because people live longer and better and healthier lives, and they need to be included in a beneficial way. So not just to make them happy, but to make them useful for society.
That
Very good
it's a
point.
very good answer to the question of how can we live healthier and happier by being more contributory to science, to life. I'm just wondering what I should do with all the hands, or whether one of you would like to pick up on that point before we turn to someone else. You've had your hand up for quite a long
I mean,
time.
may I just quickly comment?
Yes,
and
please.
just to agree with my hardy perennial back there, you know, that's wonderful. I mean, you're absolutely right. I'm minded of an article I read in a neurology journal many years ago, and it took a quote out of a Beatles song, which is, will you still need me? Will you still feed me? And of course, the reason that they called it that is when they did the epidemiology, and they predicted, you know, the people of working age versus people of sort of retirement age, the number of people, you know, when you extrapolate forward, and Lynne will have all the numbers to hand, I'm absolutely sure, you know, when you go forwards, if we don't do what you're advocating, quite frankly, we're going to have a massive dearth of people able to work and contribute to society, not only for the economy, but actually just to be able to help to look after each other as well in a productive way. So I absolutely agree that, you know, you hear all these models about different life stages and people adding different stages now later on, where people do one occupation, then they move into another one and extend effectively their working life into a different space. And I think there's a school of thought that would say that addresses our chair's point, which is, you know, that by, you know, it being healthy of mind and healthier body, by being active in that sort of way, is likely, hopefully, to have a beneficial effect in terms of quality and longevity as well.
I think you've raised a really important point, and you know, it's back to what we discussed earlier in terms of this healthy longevity is not about older people. It's actually about how we invest over the life course to make sure that people have got the best opportunity to have the happier later life that we all kind of want to enjoy. And so much of our society is based on social constructs that are just outdated. Perhaps they never worked. We've got massive inequality. We've got healthy life expectancy going the wrong way. Why is it that the education budget is weighted to the under 18s when you actually have this massive life course with which people need to be reskilling, relearning all the way through life? We've got to rethink that. The retirement age of 65 was set when life expectancy was early 60s. We were never expected to have that 40 years in retirement. So we have got to radically reimagine and rethink pretty much every aspect of our lives and what that means. And of course, that means universities as well. It's an actual massive opportunity for university to embrace mature students. We're going to need that workforce. We currently in the UK and in every Western economy simply don't have enough people to fill the jobs. We have got to embrace all of that wisdom, the skills, the knowledge, the talent, and the experience that is locked in older people over the age of 50, and really empower that to help businesses, to help research, to help society in all different roles and aspects. And that is a really, really serious question. And if I may say so, that is as a serious question for us to debate as how we deal with end-of-life care, as important as that is. So this is something that I think we're all agreeing that healthy longevity and longevity societies, we need to really reimagine pretty much every aspect. And make sure that that is a full society debate, because that intergenerational exchange and making sure we're taking account of different perspectives of fairness and equity across society is absolutely fundamental, but it's urgent. This isn't something we can push into the next 5 years. This is something that we really need to continue and to put our shoulder to now.
Times have really changed. If we were in ancient Greece, some of us here would be dead because we would have been asked to commit suicide after reaching the age of 60. Which is true, those of you. Yeah. We have an online question. May we take that, and then I'll come. I know your arm must be getting tired. Arian.
So Jim from our online audience has asked, well, he understands that life expectancy is going down in some areas of the Northeast, and asks, is social inequality the main reason for this? And if so, should this be a priority?
Is social equality the main reason for life expectancy, social inequality the main reason for life expectancy going down? Barbara,
well,
would you?
it's certainly a very kind of key factor, and I think it is very worrying. I mean, as Lynne has said, we need to be thinking about our early lives, and I think it is extremely worrying, the situation that we're in at the moment. You know, I just simply in terms of food banks, people going to food banks, but I worry about the quality of food that they're getting, and then I worry about the impact that that's going to have on them in later life. So it feels to me as though we're already sowing the seeds, or we already have this sort of deep inequalities, and we know from a lot of the research that's been done at this university just the impact that those inequalities are having, and then, you know, the burden that does create, because people, you know, manifest in many more health conditions that we've got to deal with. So I think that's a very pressing issue.
It absolutely is, and I think the the investment in the first 5 years is absolutely critical, because a lot of this is laid down in very, very early life, and that's what I mean when I keep going back to the fact this is about longevity. This is about investing early in through life health and well-being. And we set up an organisation called Voice, which we run from Newcastle, which is valuing our intellectual capital and experience. It's valuing our brain capital. And that is really, really important. It's not just about skills. It's not just about health. It's as much about the psychological health of people. It's about self-esteem. It's about confidence. All of those issues that perhaps have traditionally been treated as quite soft, but they are fundamental in order to help people to find new work, find new jobs, and so on and so forth. And so investing in people's brain capital right across the life course is just so important in order to have a better later life. And so that brings forward the role of education at schools, and how we can invest in our communities to help support people. Because certainly at the moment, I think we've got some work to do, because not just Northeast, this is a national issue, that healthy life expectancy, despite what we know about improving it, we're simply not implementing that evidence strongly enough, and perhaps we need a complete rethink about how we do that.
I'd like to bring in this gentleman and then our president.
Okay, just to bring it briefly back to the agenda of what the future of care might look like. I'm a part-time carer for my mother, who's got dementia and Parkinson's. And as a technologist, I've looked for solutions to help me with that task. So I know if she's getting up and moving around the house, I know if she's making herself a drink, and reasonably easily could tell if she's taking her regular medication. But that leaves me with 3 dilemmas. One, I feel I'm a bit prying on her, so there's a data privacy concern. And secondly, if I don't see any activity, I don't have any particular levers to pull and calling for an ambulance, which feels a bit binary. And do you think, and this all plays into your future housing type work you're looking at, do you think AI is going to help here in the fact that looking at that data on a large scale, we can predict when our elderly parents are likely to have a life-changing event?
Well, I can give you a very one-word answer, yes. I mean, absolutely, it's undoubtedly going to be, and it'll be people like yourself that we'll be turning to help with that. I mean, just to give you another example of that building I was talking about, the digitally enabled care everywhere. I mean, it won't surprise you to know. I'm going to give you a slightly different example, but it sort of plays out. Is that the occurrence of events like exacerbations of lung disease and even heart attacks and potentially strokes may not surprise you that it does relate to atmospheric weather pollution. If you could imagine harnessing the data using digital twins and actually then putting out warnings that would then feed back into primary care and to carers to be able to take appropriate interventions, you could see there being a proactive way of actually reducing those incidents from occurring. And that sounds a bit like Star Trek, but it actually could be reality. You're absolutely right that the use of algorithms, AI is being used now by researchers in Newcastle like Lynne Rochester to predict falling. And that's going to be a huge advance. It's certainly being used elsewhere to try and pick up early people, perhaps like your mum, who might be more prone than others towards urinary tract infections, and to try and introduce interventions before the infection becomes full-blown, hospitalizes the person with all the attendant risks of that. So I think this is where I was actually going to say, if I'm jumping in response to the previous point, that I totally agree with the online question about the inequalities. It's absolutely shocking and painful to see, and COVID has made it worse. And I think that the problem is that we're not going to do anything without a multidisciplinary approach, because, we would say, I would say, a lot of the root cause of this is behavioral science, and that you need to make, tackle some of the fundamental attitudes. But equally, it's a societal issue as well, and socially based issue, because of economic issues, learned behaviors, just people basically not having the money to be able to buy healthier foods. It's a massive multidisciplinary problem which we're not going to be able to crack. So sorry, I just squeezed that in there, but I really do think that's why at the moment it's in the too difficult pile, because the pattern for obesity is set so early on because of poor diet. And once you get the obesity, you're into all manner of multiple long-term conditions and comorbidities, which just happen more and more and more throughout life, make people less able to work, and it creates a vicious cycle, which we all know about.
But it's a great question. If I can say, that's why I'm optimistic in terms of the innovation that we can bring forward. And we're back to big debates that we need to have as society, and that's around data sharing, trust, ethics in AI. And again, the UK government is leading that globally. There's a commission that's been sort of formulated in the last couple of weeks to have that debate with industry, with care providers, but most importantly with citizens about those debates, because while AI, the opportunities are enormous, it does force us as a society to have those debates and discussions at the highest level. But in terms of what it can actually bring in terms of providing care for people and really empowering people to live better lives, I think it's just incredible as an opportunity.
Absolutely. Did our president wish to say something earlier? You had a hand raised.
Yeah, no, I'll make a comment about that, which, going back to David's concept of the health innovation neighbourhood, those points about it being more than medicine, of course, is the other thing we're discussing today, isn't it? We envisage this being a cross-university activity because it needs psychologists and behavioural people and social scientists. And, the beauty of a broad-based university addressing this holistic problem is it isn't the medical model of let's treat some old people's illnesses and that's what our job is. Some of us, that's what we do, Parkinson's, liver disease, but the point is this isn't just about that, and I want to get that across. Interestingly, one of the things that came across today, we have a new academic lead appointed to sort of lead the academic bit on this, and he was talking about some of the consultation that's been done with the community about this. And one of the things that came out, what they don't want is what they called an aging ghetto. They don't want this thing to be where you go to die. they want this, this site to be multi-generational. It's about multi-generational living and the housing that goes with that. So just in case people are thinking this will become just a glorified place where you go to end your life. The question I was going to ask was several of you, Anya mentioned Greece, you mentioned Malaysia, at 50 you get wrapped up in cotton wool, because you're now old, particularly if you're a woman. I was thinking about the other societies that I remember. One thinks about Native American Indians, where the older you get, the wiser you're perceived to be, and you go to them for advice. And I think Jim Edwardson might have told me that the Japanese society is a bit like that, the older, the voice analogy, valuing our intellectual capital and experience. So I guess my question is, using those sort of old examples like Native American Indians and more modern examples like Sweden and Japan, are there countries that we can learn from the way that they are approaching the fact that the good fact that we're all getting older and living longer, rather than seeing it as a burden on the health service, and actually exploiting all of that intellectual capital and experience? So can we learn from countries that do seem to be getting this better than ours, rather than having to invent it all ourselves?
It's a great question. I mean, if I kind of, start off, I mean, Voice, which is our kind of network of citizens, Ros and Mike and others in the audience, we're now in 10 countries, and that's really important for us, because that means as a wider research innovation community, we can start to work with the best of the best. We can start to work genuinely multidisciplinary, accelerate something that's a really smart innovation that might be elsewhere, bring that here and really kind of, catalyze it to kind of reach people much sooner. And there are some really kind of smart innovations out there. I would actually name, perhaps surprisingly, South Korea as an area where we have seen some real imagination to this issue. And the reason is the government have put a particular strategic emphasis on fun and happiness, which means that even when they see something that is perhaps averse, we know that chronic illnesses, etc., are particularly common, their attitude is one of positive, how can we make this better? Their entire care service is mobilized to say, well, how can we actually get someone doing what they enjoy? How can we get people to learn new hobbies? So yes, there are some really smart examples. There's also places like Singapore, where they have a real sort of emphasis on, as David said, that multidisciplinary working, actually working across this, not just putting the lens on health, but actually putting the lens on how different every department, no matter which department it is, it needs to tackle this issue of healthy longevity. And then we have countries where, may I say, they all had female prime ministers at the time, but places like New Zealand, you have Iceland, you have Denmark, Finland, and others, where again, they have really invested in social care, massive investment in care. Yes, it has taxation implications. Yes, it has implications in terms of, when you can accrue and benefit from that. But they have really invested as countries in saying that care is important, not just care of older people, care of all people is important. So we can learn from those examples and really kind of, work closely with them, collaborate on both research and innovation to make sure that we in this region, but also in the UK and wider, can really benefit from the smartest of minds that are working on this internationally. And that's where we can really be optimistic, I think, because there are some real examples where it is, there is some real optimism here. One of the ones I just want to mention for the gentleman in the front row is around, I mentioned at the start, I have an interest in dementia, and the Voice network, this is always at the forefront of their minds. And there is some amazing innovation now in terms of looking at brain waves, looking at signals. And actually, if you start to put the lens not just on the dementia and the memory loss, but say what is important to families and what's the most important thing that families have said, and we've surveyed thousands of families, is communication, how they can continue to understand what that person is experiencing and then continue to kind of connect on that most basic of human level. And there are some really imaginative, smart innovations that are coming through startup companies, which is really enabling that. So imagine, as Anya said, imagine instead of the care that we currently think we have to accept, imagine if we could bring more of those innovations through that were affordable, that were evidence-based, what a difference that would make to families like myself who are experiencing dementia. So, but what we need to do is mobilize family carers, mobilize all of that knowledge and experience that is in our universities and our research and work much closely together in order to kind of bring those into people's homes. But that is essentially what we're here for. And I think there is incredible innovation out there as more and more organizations latch on to this opportunity.
We've had such a fantastic wide-ranging discussion. We're really almost at the cutting off point here because it has gone 7 o'clock, but I did want to ask Barbara and David whether you have some final comments in response to any of these wonderful questions. Yeah. Oh,
something quite astonishing that I really would very much appreciate being able to tell you.
Oh, well, please do. And if you can do it quickly, that would be even better. And then we can adjourn to have a further discussion, which would be fantastic.
I'm a Falun Gong practitioner. I've been a Falun Gong practitioner for nearly just about 3 years. It's the best thing I've ever tried. I'm 57. I had all sorts of, I've been very seriously ill with cancer, very bad arthritis, depression, God knows what. Since doing this practice, many people worldwide, it's called Falun Gong, otherwise known as Falun Dafa. It is an ancient Chinese Buddhist practice, very ethical. It includes 5 very gentle exercises. All the classes worldwide are free. They will not charge you 1 penny. They would regard it as unethical. And this could be a way forward, but particularly well for anybody. And it promotes longevity. It is very common for long-term practitioners of this practice to end up being able to reverse the aging practice. They can end up feeling 13 years younger.
Fantastic.
And I've met them. I have actually met them. I have talked to them. And
well, thank you very much. And I think that in your lovely green and yellow in your hair, we will not be able to miss you. So please do ask this wonderful person for more information at the close of this event, which we're coming to very nearly. But I did want to let Barbara and David say a few more words.
I suppose
if you wish.
Because you asked the question about learning from other places. I mean, Newcastle is also part of the World Health Organization Age-Friendly Cities movement. And I think there's an enormous amount of very practical stuff that we can learn from other places and do. There's a very strong UK network of age-friendly communities run by the Centre for Aging Better. Because I think, you know, the innovation that you talk about, Lynn, is, you know, it's really inspiring and there's fantastic work happening. But actually, we do need to see that making a real change for people in cities. And in some ways, in the time that I've spent working on aging, I think some things have gone backwards. And that's what I would like to see change. And I would like to see some of this innovation also not exacerbate inequalities, but address inequalities. And I have some fears that, you know, that we might lose sight of that. So I think there is something about that age-friendly cities and communities movement that brings a very practical coalface intelligence to the debate.
David, would you like to?
Yeah, just thanks. I'll be really brief because I know we are out of time. I'm kind of minded of Helen, and I'm sorry that she can't be here, because actually when I was hearing the stories I said that Mark was telling, she's done something that's really practical. And as Chris knows, when we went down for our interview for the Academic Health Science Centre, which, you know, we got and really proud of, but he knows the thing that kept me awake at night was, how do you translate academic excellence out into real world impact? And, you know, how are we going to make it change? And I mean, if anything in the last 6 years has taught me is that as faculty Pro-Vice-Chancellor, that, you know, the faculty is a great thing and we've got some wonderful people and working together. But we even despite the size of the faculty, 1,700 people, whatever it is now, we can't do it ourselves. And to Chris's point, I totally agree. It's a multidisciplinary approach where, you know, we need social prescribing from our colleagues in the humanities, arts, social sciences. We need AI from people in science, agricultural engineering. We need the city council. It's got to be multidisciplinary approach, big approach to solve big problems. And if we don't do that, then actually I think we'll be lost. But the thing that really makes me optimistic is that I think Newcastle has got that kind of community, which is big enough to really have impact, but it's small enough that we know each other and we can get on and we work together. And I think if we can't solve it or become a paradigm here of really, excellent work in this space, and I don't think anywhere else can.
From Newcastle for the world, that is us. Well, this has been fantastic, far-ranging and wonderful contributions from you. And I'm sorry that we couldn't have more, but we have now gone a little over time. However, I know that our panelists will be outside, right? We're having a little reception afterwards, I believe. And we'd love to continue to talk with all of you. And just thank you very much for coming and for taking part in this evening's discussion. And thank you to our panelists.